And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Josh Scarpello back in the Justice for All studios with my partner and good friend, Pierre Latour. Say hello, Pierre.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, belatedly.
It definitely is a happy Thanksgiving if you're a Eagles fan, and I guess if you're a Dallas fan. Eagles impressive again this week, rolling their record to 10-1. But it made me think, Pierre, as we talked about preparing for this show, with the Eagles' success this year and the unexpected Phillies' success this year, is this or does this have the potential to be the greatest four-team sport season in Philadelphia's illustrious or dubious, I should say,
infamous?
History. Infamous is a better word. I am, Pierre's a transplant to this area, and I'm not sure whether he considers himself an adoptive fan, but I'm born and raised in Philly, and I have been lucky enough to see some of the great times in Philly sports. But without a doubt, the most successful year that I can remember in my 50 years here was when I was 8 years old, 1980. Let's go back to 1980, Pierre. How old were you back in 1980?
I was 23. I was just out of college. No, I'm kidding. I was. I feel that way. No, I was 11.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and living at that time. Where were you living at that time?
Just outside of Boston. And if I can remember, I don't think Boston was having as good a sports season as Philly was that year. I think the Red Sox were absolutely terrible. They were going into their post 1978 free agency debacle, so they were a mess.
Mm-hmm.
The Larry Bird era had not yet started, so the Celtics were really bad, one of the worst teams in the league. I don't follow the Patriots. The Patriots were pretty much irrelevant in the NFL until 1986, so they must have been awful again. And then the Bruins, I think the Bruins were good, but I don't think they were anything special. So nothing compared to the run that Philly was on in 1980.
No, let's recap. Let's take everybody back to 1980. Josh was 8 years old, living at home on Ferndale Street with all his brothers and his sister and his mom and dad. The Phillies, I guess at the culmination of a good run, because they were a good team in the mid to late 70s.
Yeah.
Finally got over the top, got to the World Series, and defeated the Kansas City Royals for what would be the only win of those four teams in the championship rounds. But the Sixers also made it to the finals that year. That was before Moses Malone, Dr. J-led Sixers that also had trouble getting over the top. They made it to the finals that year and lost to, I guess the Bird era had started, Pierre, because they lost to the Magic Johnson-led Lakers, which begs the question: what did the Celtics do in Bird's first year? They must have been much better. But
I don't remember. Maybe the Sixers went through the Celtics that year. I honestly don't remember.
People remember. I remember as a Sixers fan losing that series, and if you're a Lakers fan, you remember Magic Johnson playing center and
right Game 6 when Kareem was hurt. Yeah,
correct. And just establishing himself as one of the greatest point guards ever to play in his first season. The Eagles, led by Dick Vermeil, Ron Jaworski, Wilbert Montgomery, made it to the Super Bowl that year.
Coming off beating the Cowboys in the NFC Championship game.
Right. Which for many Philadelphians probably qualified as the Super Bowl. Like beating your one of your most, if not the most hated rival, and going to the big game was certainly a high note.
Well, and the Eagles, I think, must have been like a touchdown favorite in that Super Bowl, right?
Oh yeah. I know a lot about this.
It was like Jim Plunkett, the Jim Plunkett Raiders.
And the Raiders were the first wild card team, I think, to make it all the way and win the championship round.
Now, can you name the Super Bowl MVP from that year? I don't know why I know this, but
probably the running back.
Nope. Was not an offensive player.
I have no idea. I think Jaws threw a pick or two. Jaws was very good. Jaws had a great year that year.
But he had a terrible Super Bowl, and I think Rod Martin, on the Raiders, who I think was a linebacker. I think he had 2 picks, and I think was the Super Bowl MVP that year. Defensive player.
The running back that's blanking.
Marcus Allen?
Marcus Allen.
Yeah, well, that was a different Super Bowl against the Redskins, but close.
He wasn't in. All right, well, I'm not going to. I just remember losing. And then although I wasn't much of a Flyers fan, and I really.
Right. You had to Google the Flyers information, right?
Google the Flyers.
You're like, oh my God, they were in the Stanley Cup Finals.
Can you believe it? The Flyers were in a finals, and they lost as well to the New York Islanders.
Well, which, to be fair, that was the Islanders. That was a dynasty that won 4 consecutive Stanley Cup playoffs.
No shame in losing to that team.
Right.
But that occurrence has never happened since, and
I bet you. I would even. You think that any city has ever had any city that's got 4 major sports teams has ever had them all appear in the same calendar year in the championship of every league?
That's a good research question for our research team. I don't know.
If we were a real podcast, we would have researched that ahead of time and had the answer instead of just throwing that out there to the audience and being like, you know what, audience? You're not going to get an answer because we didn't look it up.
Maybe by the end of this podcast,
you know what? Subscribe to the podcast and put it in the comments whether or not you did that research for us. How about that?
Well, if that was the high watermark for being a Philadelphia sports fan, what do you make so far of this year's edition of the teams? The surprising run by the Phillies, which made me think when I'm watching them, what an ordinary team they were.
Yeah.
And I said to my wife, I'm like, all year long, I'm like, when the playoff run was starting, if they win this World Series, this will be the first time I've ever, we won a title where I can honestly say I didn't watch an entire regular season Phillies game from beginning to end all season. And in part it's because I go to bed way too early, probably.
Yeah, because the games end after 8:30.
But it's also a part that there wasn't a great feel for this Phillies team until the playoffs.
They were a weird team where a lot was expected. They got off to that terrible start. They fired Girardi, right? That seemed to spark the team. Then their MVP goes out for the whole summer, right? He misses 2-3 months. They play really well in his absence. And then just when it looks like they've got everything locked up, they do that, September swoon where they went 5-12 over the first 17 games in September, and everybody's freaking out. And they kind of when did they didn't clinch a playoff spot until the last week of the season, right?
No, you're right. And there was a couple things about that run that I thought about after it was all over. One, would it be even possible to have done this if there wasn't a designated hitter rule in the National League this year? Harper was out for an extended period of time, couldn't play the field, but could bat. And also that affected strategy at the end because I think they had fewer moves because Harper couldn't play in field. But also when they got on this run, the expression teams that are built for a short series or built I think I finally understood what that meant. This was just over the long haul, this is just a regular team, right? Especially in baseball. But they had as it played out, they had 2 very good top of the line starters in I'm blanking on
Nola and Wheeler.
Wheeler, and I'm blanking on the third actually.
Ranger Danger.
Yeah, Ranger Danger. Who I don't know whether by the end he probably had gone.
He might have been their number 2 by the end of the whole run.
They had a powerful lineup. They got hot and stayed hot, and was led by a superstar that was incredibly hot.
Yep.
And they had 2 or 3 really dominant relief pitchers. They weren't a particularly great defensive team, and I think that was the one flaw that they kind of played around. But this was a team that, given the chance, and once that spark happened, they just flamed for 2 or 3 weeks of just incredible baseball. Really gave the city a great ride. Had me thinking after Game 3 that oh my gosh, we're going to win the World Series, and then of course everything came crashing back down there. Right. There's no way
But
he's just
still,
going to come in here and win 2 or 3. That's
yeah,
not
but I
going to
mean,
happen.
you got within 2 wins of the World Series, right?
Right.
So great run by the Phillies, right? Your stupid Eagles, against, and I knew the Eagles would be good this year, and I think
Mhm.
I don't, sometimes we record these podcasts and they don't get posted, but I thought the Eagles this year were going to walk away with the division. I thought they were better than the Cowboys. I thought their offense got better. I thought their defense got better. I didn't know if Jalen Hurts was going to get a lot better, but he clearly got better as a passer. And they sit at 10-1, best record in the league. Looking at the number 1 seed, which isn't totally locked up, but it's there for them to lock it up. And I guess, and so the Eagles are poised to be, which is a separate discussion too, is that what do you think? And I looked this up. I actually did my research. So Eagles are poised to be the number 1 seed, which you would think would be great, right?
Mhm.
So how many times in the last 5 years do you think the number 1 seed in either conference made it to the Super Bowl? So that would be 10 teams in the last 5 years.
How many of those 10
How
made
many?
it to the
Yeah,
Super
10
Bowl?
teams, 2 number 1 seeds every year, both conferences, last 5 years.
Half, maybe? 4? I'll say 4.
You are right. The answer is 4.
Well,
But
was
here's
Tampa Bay? Well, no, Tampa Bay wasn't a number 1.
no. So last year 0.
Mhm.
Green Bay number 1 seed lost in the division round. Tennessee the number 1 seed lost in the division round. Year before 2020, Green Bay number 1 seed lost in the conference final. That was the Tampa Bay upset, right?
Mhm.
Kansas City, the number 1 seed, made it to the Super Bowl and then lost to Tampa Bay. 2019, San Francisco was the number 1 seed in the NFC. They made it to the Super Bowl. Baltimore was the number 1 seed in the AFC. They lost in the division round. The year before that, 2018, again, neither team made the Super Bowl. New Orleans lost in the conference finals. Kansas City lost in the conference finals. And then you have to go all the way back to 2017, your Eagles again. They were the number 1 seed. They made the Super Bowl, obviously. New England, the number 1 seed. They made the Super Bowl. And then I went even further back, and the interesting thing was there was a weird period, 2013, 14, and 15, 3 years in a row, both number 1 seeds every year made the Super Bowl. So in 13, Seattle and Denver, Super Bowl. 2014, Seattle and New England, Super Bowl. 2015, Carolina and Denver, Super Bowl. 3 years in a row. And then all of a sudden, that happened again in 17. So 13, 14, 15, and 17, both number 1 seeds made the Super Bowl. That hasn't happened since.
I think that makes sense when you think about the expansion of the playoffs, though. I mean, they're letting more.
But they only expanded the playoffs last year. Last year was the first time they expanded the playoffs.
Oh, I thought they added another wild card before last year.
No, I don't think so. I think it was 6 teams from each conference up until last year. They expanded it to 7.
Okay.
So,
well, that the Eagles don't have a long history in the Super Bowl, but their most recent history, the blueprint that they laid out for themselves, they could do the same thing again if they win a couple more games.
yeah.
Which could put them in that same category of having a first round bye, and then potentially an interesting first round playoff matchup that we talked about yesterday.
Right. That could be the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, is that a nightmare scenario for any Philadelphia Eagles fan?
I think it's a nightmare for both fan bases, right? I mean, for either somebody has to live with that. If that happens, right? If it and it looks like it probably will, right? Because the Eagles are 10-1, right? You figure even if they go 14-3, they probably are still the number 1 seed unless some goofy stuff happens, right? Like the only way they lose 2 of their last 6 and don't get the number 1 seed is that they would have to lose another division game and lose the Cowboys game, right? So they've got against the division, they've got what? 2 against the Giants, one against the Cowboys. Do they have one?
Cowboys, and then we look through this. They also have the Titans this week. They have Chicago left.
In terms of division games, because that's the second tiebreaker I figured out.
They're done with those Redskins. They've still got to play the
all right, so they've got 3 division games, 2 against the Giants, 1 against the Cowboys. So if they dropped one of those Giants games and lost to the Cowboys, and the Cowboys and the Eagles finish with the same record, which would have to be like 14-3, which also means the Cowboys have to run the table.
Right.
But if that happened, the first tiebreaker is head-to-head, which is a push because they would have been 1-1, right? Second tiebreaker is best division record, and the Cowboys would be 5-1, and the Eagles would be 4-2. Cowboys would win the division and then possibly be the 1 seed, maybe, right? But probably not lower than the 2. But again, I think that's unlikely, and that means that the Eagles would be the 1. Minnesota most likely the 2 because they've only got 2 losses right now to the Eagles and the Cowboys.
Right.
San Francisco probably the 3 with the 3rd best record, and then whoever wins the South, which is going to be somebody with a lousy records, probably like Tampa Bay or Atlanta at 9-8 is going to be the 4, right? Which slots the Cowboys in as the 5. So the 4-5 would most likely be Dallas going to either Tampa Bay or Atlanta. In which case you would think the Cowboys would be favored. I mean, never mind the fact that means almost certainly Mike McCarthy will lose that fucking game.
If Atlanta hosts a playoff game, they're going to lose that game. Right? I mean, they're not a good team, I don't think. But, I mean,
let's say if that line is Cowboys by 4, and you're a gambling person, are you laying 4 points on the road with Mike McCarthy?
Against Atlanta?
Yeah, against Atlanta. Frisky Atlanta with Marcus Mariota and Drake London.
Probably.
You're laying the points there?
I mean, Atlanta's not very skilled. I don't know how they're winning games. And recently they've had some injuries, and Marcus Mariota's their quarterback. I mean, I just... I had Kyle Pitts on my fantasy team, and he's throwing the ball like he's in junior high school. I mean, throwing the ball 9 times a game. I mean, this is
we're not going to talk about your fantasy team because that's a whole other podcast. It's like an hour-long therapy session for you and your terrible fantasy team.
That's right.
But my point is that Eagles would get a bye, and then they would get to face the lowest seeded team. So unless somebody like the 6 seed Washington team or the 7 seed Giants team or whoever it was, or Seattle if they made it, unless one of those teams really pulled a big upset, right? One of those teams would have to go on the road and beat Minnesota in Minnesota or beat San Francisco in San Francisco.
Right.
If the seeds held, then in that divisional round, the number 1 seeded Eagles would most likely face the number 5 seed Cowboys.
Yeah, we don't want to hear that. Incidentally, this portion of Justice for All is brought to you by the law offices of Scarpello and Latour. This holiday season, give the gift of freedom. If your loved one is in jail and you want to get him or her out, call Scarpello and Latour. Philly's Best Defense. www.phillybestdefense.com. If you are watching this or listening to this and you live in Pennsylvania or South Jersey, Scarpello and Latour can help. Serving the community for over 14 years, Scarpello and Latour, Philly's Best Defense. All right, so it wasn't much of a segue since we can't stop talking about NFL football anyway. But in segment 2, as we reset everything here, the Eagles are 10-1. And I was thinking about this as I was preparing last night and just about Jalen Hurts. And again, we could do an entire podcast just on him versus his predecessor. You mentioned about 5 years ago the Eagles were on another pretty good run, right?
Yep.
And that was a run that was led by another second-year quarterback, not a much higher drafted than Jalen Hurts, and we all know how that ended. Is Jalen Hurts having a better year now than Carson Wentz was having in 2017?
Statistically, yes, and it's not even close.
Do you think Jalen Hurts is a better quarterback now? You think he's a more effective quarterback than Carson Wentz was at his prime in that season? And
I mean, more effective. I mean, that's hard to say. I think that's kind of personal preference. I mean, I still think Hurts is more of a runner than a passer, right? And I will give him credit that, the leap he made in terms of being able to throw the ball, his accuracy, the way he reads defenses is 100% better than it was last year. And last year it was bad. I mean, you saw it in that Tampa Bay playoff game. He was bad in that game. And last year he was basically a running back that played quarterback. This year he's running just as much and just as effectively, but he's throwing the ball much, much better, which is the big reason why I think the Eagles have taken a leap. That and they have, more weapons. I mean, A.J. Brown helps too. But I looked at the numbers, right? And so if you go back to Wentz in 17, so Wentz played 13 games before he got hurt, right? He got hurt in that 13th game.
Right.
Everybody looking back on it would say, he was going to win the MVP. I think he still finished third.
He was well on his way. Yeah.
All right, so this is Wentz's numbers from 17 through 13 games. Completed 60% of his passes, not very good. 32, almost 3,300 yards, very good. 33 touchdowns to 7 picks.
Yeah, team record. Still a team record. Yeah.
That's real. I mean, 33 touchdowns to 13 games. I mean, he was flirting with 40 touchdowns. He was on his way to
40, yeah. He was probably on his way to 40, yep.
He was averaging 253 yards passing a game, which also means that if he had just stuck with his average and played the full season, he would have had 4,000 yards passing.
Right.
And he ran for 300 yards. No touchdowns, but 300 yards. So that's, really good. So Hurts, through 11 games now, is completing 67% of his passes, right? Which, again, is kind of the norm in the NFL now, but still impressive, 67%. He's thrown for 2,500 yards, 17 touchdowns, only 3 picks, which is also impressive that he doesn't.
Yeah, he takes care of the ball.
Force the ball. Yeah, doesn't turn the ball over. 232 yards a game, so not nearly the same as Wentz in terms of, but that's by design. But here's the other difference too. He's rushed for 600 yards and 8 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Right? 8 touchdowns. So, I mean, I know Wentz had 33, but you throw in these 8, that gets him up to 25, right?
Yeah.
So that means that Wentz was 33-7 through 13 games. Hurts is 25-3 through 11 games.
Do you think Hurts's success this year, because this guy has been so interesting. I mean, he's played this way his entire career, it sounds like, from when he was a starter. I mean, he's a running quarterback, makes good decisions. We all know about what happened at Alabama, got replaced in the championship game, left. But is his success now like a product of him changing himself to become a better player in the NFL, or a product of the NFL and his coaches saying, you've got special skills that we were underestimating? And we haven't really been, because I think there is a stigma against now guys that run first and guys that can't pass like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady or something like that. And we're seeing a different style of football, maybe an old school style of football, that I think for years we've been told that's not the way to win in the NFL.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think when the Eagles were smart, and I think the Ravens did the same thing too. Is they didn't take a guy who was primarily a running quarterback, Lamar Jackson, the same way. They didn't take a guy and say, we're going to make you into a pocket passer. Right. We're going to change you. They kind of built. They said, okay, this is a guy who can run. Let's build an offense around him. And it's been successful in Baltimore, and I think it's been successful here. But by the same token, if the Eagles were just doing the same thing they did last year on offense, right, which is essentially like Hurts is just going to run for 70, 80, 100 yards a game, and he's going to throw the ball 15 times and throw for 120 yards, right? They're not 10-1. The reason why they're 10-1 now is that, and you see they run so many of these RPOs, and part of the reasons it works is that defenses now have to respect him throwing the ball, right? Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, if he kind of rolls out to his right, you don't see guys flying up the field trying to hit him, knowing that he's not going to throw the ball. They don't know if he's going to throw the ball or run it. And that's a credit to how, again, the stats, 67% is really good for anybody. Right. So I think it's a credit to both of them.
If
I can't believe I have to sit here and do a podcast and say nice things about the goddamn
about
Eagles.
Jalen Hurts, I know this is
Yeah.
why I prepared this very specially
This is
for
no
you.
more of you picking the topics, I think.
No more. If Jalen Hurts were to go down, and people are going to say, Josh, why would you say something? I mean, is any team worth it? I guess two questions. Could they recover? Is this team strong enough after, let's say, the next game? If they were 12-1, lost them in the next game. The thing that surprised me about the 2017 team was that after Wentz went down, you realized, I mean, you always knew it. You're like, man, they have a pretty good team on both sides of the ball. They're playing good defense. They're playing good offense. Their quarterback's having a fantastic year. I see it very similar so far this year. They're playing good defense. They're playing good offense, having a fantastic quarterback year. Do you think they're the same type of team if Hurts goes down? I mean, of course, we're talking about Gardner Minshew now, too. I guess it's a totally different ballgame there. Does this team have any chance to do anything? Could this team go anywhere if he?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I thought back in 2017 that once Wentz went down, I thought the Eagles were dead, right?
Yeah.
I was like, there's no way. I mean, Nick Foles, really?
Yeah.
You know, you're going to win 2 playoff games and a Super Bowl with Nick Foles as the quarterback?
Right.
And I would think the same thing. I mean, I think it's true just about any team, right? Any team, you pick any team in the NFL, right? Mm-hmm. And say, okay, your quarterback's injured. What happens to you next? Like what happens to the Chiefs if Pat Mahomes goes down? Yeah. What happens to the Bills if Josh Allen goes down? Right? Yeah. You know, what happens? You know, I won't say Jimmy Garoppolo. That might be an upgrade if they put somebody else in there. But I mean, almost any good team, you take the quarterback out, right. The downgrade to the backup is enormous. Now, I guess you could say, you know, at least with the Eagles, Minshew has been an NFL quarterback, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's been okay. So you might say, okay, with Minshew at least, and the weapons, we can run the ball still, right? We don't need Minshew for that. We still have good receivers, right? So, you know, I guess you could have a repeat of 2017 where you're like, if we're the number 1 seed, everybody's got to come to Philly and play us, and we get that favorable draw, right? Which you did. And I mean, the other thing about nobody really talks about in 17 was that how you ducked all the good teams, right? The 2 best teams, I still remember the 2 best teams in the NFC outside of the Eagles that year were the Saints and the Rams. Mm-hmm. And they both lost, right? The Saints lost on that ridiculous miracle play where the guy like missed the tackle and like and Stephon Diggs ran into the end zone. So you got to play the Vikings in the championship game. And the week before you played the freaking Falcons, who somehow went to LA and beat the Rams, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I still don't know how that happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that happened.
So, I mean, listen, every championship you need a little luck, and that was some of the luck the Eagles had then. I mean, maybe that happens again. I don't know. I mean,
who's possible. The smartest guy in the Eagles organization right now? Is it Jeff Lurie, or is it his henchman Howie Roseman? Like who deserves all the kudos and the laurels at their feet and such?
Well, I mean, coming from a Cowboys fan, I've got to say Jeffrey Lurie because he stays the fuck out of the way, right? That's kind of nice to have an owner who's just like, no. I hired you guys to run the football operation. You go ahead, run the football operation, right? If it's a money issue, then come talk to me. But I'm certainly not going to appoint myself GM and have a press conference after every game and stick my nose.
Does Jerry Jones have a GM, or is it just
he is the GM?
He is the GM. I mean, he doesn't have like some person in.
No, there's not even like a puppet guy who's in place. He is the GM of the Dallas Cowboys and has been since I think 94, 95. I mean, he gets credit for the 95 Super Bowl with Barry Switzer because, you know, that was his handpicked successor to Jimmy Johnson. But, yeah, Jerry's been the GM for a while. So
I think Lurie's got some special management skills, and I think he stuck with, you know, unlike, you know, what happens in all pro sports tends to be cyclical. Sometimes teams do well, then they crap out, and then somebody gets fired. The Eagles had periods of success with, you know, Andy Reid for the longest time, kept him here for 14 years, let him go. Had some success with Howie Roseman early on, then the team crapped out. Then he rebuilt them. Then they crapped out. Now he seems like he might have rebuilt them again. And
Yeah, and we had this discussion the other day too, which is I think he deserves a lot of credit for thinking outside the box on his head coaching hires, right? So, after they finally moved on from Reed, remember they went way outside the box and got Chip Kelly from Oregon, right? Which people initially were like praised and thought this was great, right? Oh, he's this innovative offensive guy, which maybe he was, but he turned out to be a complete fucking asshole that nobody liked, right? I mean, everybody hated the guy apparently. Didn't go to Christmas parties and was a dick. And so they although wasn't entirely unsuccessful, was 10-6 in his 10-6 made the playoffs, 10-6 missed the playoffs, right? Yeah. And then everything fell apart that third year and they fired him. And then they do the same thing again, which is they go completely outside the box and they hire Peterson, who didn't have an interview anywhere in the NFL. Nobody'd even heard of him except that, he was an Andy Reid guy as the offensive coordinator in Kansas City. So they hired him. They win a Super Bowl with him. And then I guess you could either say that was fluky or his wagon was kind of attached to Wentz. And when Wentz went off the rails, that was the end of Peterson. And then when they got rid of Peterson, they did the exact same thing again, which is, they hired this guy, Nick Sirianni, that nobody had heard of really, right? Wasn't interviewing, wasn't getting any buzz, was really young, and was on Frank Reich's staff out of Indy. And I mean, to be honest with you, again, keep having him to do this on this podcast, he's probably been the most impressive of the three guys, I think. I think he had that rough introduction where he was a little bit goofy and everybody made fun of him at the press conference.
Same way. People thought, in fact,
but I think Peterson had a little bit more gravitas in the sense that Peterson was like, he played in the NFL. He was a quarterback in the NFL.
People knew who he was.
And he worked directly under Andy Reid, and the Chiefs' offense was a juggernaut, and so people were like, all right, fine, whatever. This guy Sirianni was like, I don't know how old is he, but he's still in his 30s, right? He's 35 maybe. So this is a young kid, not a lot of experience, never played in the NFL, was like a receiver in college, coaching in his family and stuff like that, but not at this level. And then, he's the offensive coordinator for a couple of years for the Colts. Really? That's your guy. And especially another guy where there was no, real buzz around. He wasn't a guy that he kind of came out of nowhere, but
candidates out there that you thought might be more, deserving or more experienced or more.
Well, let's all remember that, Marvin Lewis was available. I mean, Jerry brought him in for the Cowboys gig and then decided after looking at Marvin Lewis, he had to go with Mike McCarthy. So, I mean, the opposite approach. Again, I'll point out the Cowboys were stuck with the tried and true, give me the old retread coach who's not successful at all. That's the guy I want. Not some young, smart, up-and-coming guy. Give me a retread.
It's remarkable. I mean, I think it has as much to do with success on the field as anything is the coaching. I think coaching is very hard, and I think it's very hard each and every year because of injuries and such and different teams and stuff. So if you find a good one, and it's also hard because coaches maybe only are good for so many years, and then it's time to move on to somebody else, and it's tough to know. Like when he cut loose Peterson, although they were looking for scapegoats at that point. This guy was only a few years removed from winning the only Super Bowl. He could have done something a lot less, I don't want to say courageous because he fired a guy, but he could have taken a higher road and said, I'll give him another year or two, but maybe learned his lesson with Andy Reid. But when to know to cut the ties, and then I'd love to pick his brain and say, well, what are you looking for, in a new NFL coach? Because last four coaches, and the book isn't written yet on Sirianni, but it's going to be Sirianni, Doug Peterson, Chip Kelly, Andy Reid. He's done pretty well. I mean, if you want to be a good franchise, I guess hire good coaches. You want to be a bad franchise, keep firing coaches, or just hire the wrong ones and stick with them for too long. So I got to give it to him. I got to give him credit where credit's due. He's done a good job. At least bringing in executives and coaches to coach up his players. This portion of Justice for All is brought to you by the law offices of Scarpello and Latour. Injured in an accident, slip and fall, we can help with that. Scarpello and Latour help people every day who have been injured. No case is too small or too big. Looking for an attorney who cares? Call Pierre at 215-732-0460. Philadelphia, the suburbs, and South Jersey. If you are hurt, we can help. Call and set up a free consultation today. Now, Pierre, before we started today, we had to delay the start time of this recording so that mostly you and somewhat myself could watch live stream of the United States versus Iran in the World Cup.
Yes.
And we have some good news from that game, right?
Yeah, by the time people will be listening to this podcast, they will already know that the United States has advanced into the elimination round, the round of 16. That means, right? And you're a big soccer fan, right?
Yeah, huge.
Yeah, I know. What's your favorite EPL team? How about this? How about name a Premier League team? Actually, I'm sorry. Name 3 Premier League teams. Ready, go.
Manchester United.
That's one. You're stumped after one.
Richmond, right? Richmond was one.
University of Richmond, no.
The Richmond from
the Richmond Spiders, no.
The Richmond Dogs from
the Richmond Dogs. Is this something from Ted Lasso? I don't have Apple Plus. Yeah. No, it doesn't count. So it's not. Those are not real teams on the Ed Lasso show.
Man U is a real team. But
yeah, Manchester United. I gave you credit for that.
I couldn't name another team. I just don't. And I know the Philadelphia Union is a real team.
Yeah, that's not the same. That's an American team in the MLS, not in the Premier League.
Well, this is here's what I know. This is the collection of the greatest teams around the world, and they're playing in Qatar, correct? And
yes.
Now the United States is into the elimination round after.
Well, first of all, you have to qualify to get in. They only let 32 teams in the entire world, right? And this is the most popular sport in the entire world. Everybody plays soccer. Everybody has a national soccer team. So there are hundreds of national soccer teams. You have to qualify. Only the 32 best make it, right? And last time we didn't even qualify, right? Which is somewhat, shocking considering we're a country of 350 million people. And, soccer it's like the most popular sport in the world. Everybody plays soccer. I played soccer growing up. Yeah. And now both my kids played soccer, even my oldest against his wishes. I forced him to do it because I wouldn't let him play football. But you would think that out of all these kids every weekend in the fall in this country playing soccer, and you're like, okay, can you give me the 15 best soccer players in the country? And, we've got to be among the top 20 in the world, right? And that wasn't true. But we got in this year. We're in the 32. We had a disappointing tie against Wales, that traditional soccer powerhouse that nobody could pick on a map. But we tied England, right? England's number 5 in the world, right? Really strong squad, probably one of the favorites to win the whole thing. We outplayed them and drew them 0-0. And then we had to go in and face arch rival Iran, right? The people who took the hostages in 79, the people who coined the phrase America the Great Satan, and all we had to do was now beat Iran to get in. And they pulled out a 1-0 victory this afternoon to move on. And now they're into the round of 16. So that means the United States is now among only 16 teams in the entire world still alive. And that may all end on Saturday because they have to play the Netherlands, apparently. But they're going to play the Netherlands Saturday morning, I think they said. So,
there's only 2 ways to increase people's knowledge and fandom of that type of soccer, if you ask me, in this country. One is to win the whole thing, which I don't think we're capable.
That's not happening anytime soon, I don't
think.
Then
people would go, just like with the women's team, there would be people would be excited about it. Look at Lance Armstrong. Does anybody care about bicycle?
America loves the front run.
Yeah. Nobody loves the front run. Number 2, short of winning it, we should host it every other time. Like,
yeah,
United States, somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, it should be. I mean, number one, like it's been beaten to death, but like, why the hell are they hosting the World Cup in Qatar, right? In the fall, in a tiny little Muslim country where you can't drink beer. No offense to our Muslim listeners out there, but I mean, there's not many sporting events. You know, has there ever been a sporting event that you've shown up to that's been had no alcohol policy and you were excited for that? I mean,
the March Madness was dry for the longest time. I don't know.
I think it still is if you're in the cheap seats. We went that one year. Remember, we were in a luxury box. They let you drink as much as you want.
As much as you want with air. But yeah, we were cheap seats.
You pay for it. The NCAA is like, fine, we don't care. Get blasted. Yeah, but I think not even the World Cup is doing that. Like they should be like. I mean, it would have been funny. Like this would have been another reason to tune in. Like what if they had sections of the stadium that were like all the alcohol you can drink, right? You had to like pay a bonus. I mean, I'm sure Budweiser pushed for that, but they didn't get it. But
yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine you could have a worldwide sporting event and there's no beer sponsor or no alcohol sponsor. But
back to your point, yeah, they should it should be like the Super Bowl, and they should just pick like 6 or 8 or even 10 of the best host countries, right? And just rotate it, right? It should be like England, France, Spain, Italy, United States.
Or I think they should have different
Argentina,
and they should send the pools to different sites and then bring them together for the championship round. Like spread it out a little bit.
Yeah, you could. Well, the United States is hosting not the next one, but I think 2. So this is 2022. Maybe it is. Maybe we are hosting 2026. Again, another point of research that could have been done ahead of time that we didn't do.
Well, you know, a lot of our
hosting and Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is going to be hosting some of the games, I think.
I did hear that.
I assume they're going to play. You think they're going to play at Lincoln Financial, or you think they're going to play at the Union League, the Union Field down in Chester? They probably have to play at a bigger venue.
They'd have to play at a big venue. Why would they?
They probably have to play at Lincoln Financial.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see them. Yeah, I can't see them playing in a smaller venue than the bigger ones.
Well, listen, we also left off. I mean, when we started the podcast on talking about the greatest sports years in the history of Philadelphia, right? And we talked briefly about the Eagles are heading for the number 1 seed. The Phillies went to the World Series. We didn't talk about the Flyers because we can just ignore the Flyers. The Sixers, who have, had a rough start, but again, are probably going to finish as a top 4 team in the East or top 5 and make the playoffs. And you conveniently left out the fact that the Philadelphia Union, the MLS team, went to the finals this year.
Okay.
And they lost, but the MLS team, and the MLS has gotten a lot more popular, right? And that's another thing that drives interest in the World Cup is that, there is now where 10, 15 years ago, if you were a kid growing up and you went on to play legit Division I soccer and you wanted to make a living or play professional soccer, your only choice was to go overseas, right. In which case they probably weren't interested in you, right? You simply weren't, because, most of the overseas clubs are putting kids in these academies when they're like 12 years old. They're taking them out of school and just training them. Right. So if you're like a 19, 20, 21-year-old college grad being like, hey, I want to come play for your club, it's probably not happening. But, now a lot of these kids can go play MLS, right? And they're not making a ton of money, but you're still playing a professional sport. You're still making a living, right? So
absolutely.
And you see a lot of the guys on the U.S. squad this year are MLS players, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to see these guys play, I think, on a regular basis, and the women, for you to have an interest in them, and there's got to be a reason to go out and watch them. And if it appears as though they're a minor league or they're a second league, nobody's going to be that interested. But if they're playing the highest quality soccer in your backyard, I think it's a no-brainer. People would come out and have come out to support them. But that is probably a topic for another podcast. Pierre, we are at the time of the podcast where I think we should wrap it up and remind everybody that if you are arrested in Philadelphia, the suburbs, or South Jersey, and you need a really good attorney, call Scarpello and Latour. We are experienced. We are former prosecutors from the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, serving under the Honorable Lynn Abraham many, many, many years ago. We're fighters. We are not afraid to take the toughest cases on and take them all the way into trial. That's what makes us different. What also makes us different is that we care. Every case is the biggest case to us. And if you hire Scarpello and Latour, you are going to get the best in Philly, the best in South Jersey, the best defense around. So if you need a good attorney, remember us, call us for a free consultation. Pierre, this has been a wonderful little time with you. Any last words, words of advice, encouragement that you want to send out there to our thousands of listeners and viewers?
No, just remember the phone number 215-732-0460. And of course, 24/7 on the internet, on the World Wide Web, www.phillybestdefense.com, where you can go and see anything you want to see about our past successes, both criminal and civil, right? As you said before, not only criminal cases, but civil cases. And we also are happy to pay referrals to any of our lawyer friends out there that are listening. So, enjoy the week. We got who the Eagles have coming up this week.
Eagles, Tennessee Titans.
Titans.
Tannehill and the Titans. It's going to be a tough one.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's one of the games